Okay, so this slideshow lecture thingy, we're going to talk about piecing arguments together. This is a way that philosophers engage with the text, so it's part of our methodology. So the question is, why do we care about being able to reconstruct arguments? Well, remember that philosophical methodology requires us to ask a question, provide an answer to that question, and defend that answer, but also requires us to evaluate answers. And reconstructing arguments is basically how we interpret and interact with the text. So in order to do the evaluation of the argument, of the reasons given in support of an answer, we need to be able to convey an understanding of the argument. And the way we do that is to reconstruct it as charitably as possible, which means to reconstruct the strongest form of the argument present in the text. And so this is how we demonstrate that we understand what's going on in the text. So this should be the sort of thing that we all agree is happening. So if I give you a reconstruction of a text, or you give me a reconstruction of the text, we should be able to say like, oh, we have a lot in common, and where we maybe differ is in our wording or how we structure the reconstruction, not so much in the content of the reconstruction. So this is what we might call a descriptive activity. We're just saying what's going on. But this is a skill, so we're going to practice it. So again, to reiterate, we care about reconstructing arguments because we can't do anything else in philosophy unless we understand what's going on. But part of this is also going to be necessary for your guys' papers. You have 2 short papers and 1 longer paper. And when we're doing our readings, we need to be looking out for these, what I call writing virtues. And they're from Meta, a writing guide for professional philosophers, but they'll apply to you too to some extent. And we can see this modeled in various texts that we're going to be interacting with this semester. But it's also something you can think about emulating. Now, it's a lot of writing virtues, so you might just want to pick 1 or 2 to try to emphasize. So ambition, strive for excellence. This is really easy to see in a writer like Descartes, for instance. He's got a big objective. I'm going to prove that God exists and the soul is distinct from the body. He's going to do that to the best of his ability. Strive for excellence. Authority, be confident and take on the best arguments. Right? So it's easy to massacre a village full of strawmen. It's a lot harder to take on good arguments. So you should be looking to do that in your writing. And we'll see that that's kind of what these authors are doing. So we'll see Elizabeth and Descartes, they're going to argue about something, which is this question of how the immaterial mind can move a material body. And Descartes is going to try to take this argument on, despite the fact that failing to be successful in doing so would be devastating to his view. So taking on the best arguments. In your own writing, you might be led to hedge your bets. So say something like, it seems to be the case, or it's possible that I'm right. Or you might do this thing where I ask you a question and you say, well, it depends. And then you don't say more than that. That's all hedging. You're not very confident in the position that you're defending, so you hedge your bets. Just changing that language to, it is the case. Or I argue, or I conclude. Using strong, confident language is to show that you're an authority on the topic. Systematicity. Organize your arguments, ideas, and concepts. Objections, don't just list them. So think about Descartes. How he proceeds, the meditations go 1 through 6, but those are days of the week. He's meditating on this. It's a religious text, right? Day 1, all right, this is what we can doubt. Day 2, all right, we know that we are thinking things, so we know something. Day 3, we know God exists. Day 4, this is why we can make mistakes. Day 5, okay, now that we know how we make mistakes, we know how we can avoid mistakes, so let's talk about other ideas, things outside of us. Day 6, meditation 6, all right, we're establishing that we have a body, right? This is an organization. He's not just saying, here's 5 reasons in a list for why you can think that God exists, right? He's giving systematic, interconnected points. Rigor. Use strong evidence or identify assumptions. Remember, assumptions are part of reasoning. That's what we learned earlier. Using strong evidence is to just make sure that the reasons you're offering are the best reasons you can. Right? So this is what Descartes thinks and does when he thinks that. He's like, okay, something's being deceived, and if something's being deceived, that means there is a thing to be deceived, so that thing exists, so that's us, right? That's our minds. So he thinks he's giving strong evidence there. That's what's meant by rigor. And failing to identify your assumptions is a big no-no. It's a little mean. Significance. Emphasize what's important, minimize what's not. Right, so Descartes, he doesn't go off on tangents to talk about things that aren't important. He briefly mentions causes, and they relate to relationship between God and his creations, right? So it has nothing to do with him going off on a tangent about the nature of causation, right? So he doesn't talk about stuff that's unimportant to his task. He also ignores arguments that he doesn't think are important to his task. For instance, he says, like, there's tons of arguments that atheists could provide, but I'm not going to recap them because I'm just going to start from scratch, right? So it's outside the scope of his project. He doesn't talk about it. Economy. Defend the strongest claim you can, prune controversial and weak premises, right? So this is something you should aim to do in your writing. Don't make a controversial premise unless you have to. And take the strongest stance you can take. That's what Descartes does. Soul exists separate from the body. That's a strong claim. That's what he's trying to prove. All right, prune controversial and weak premises. So he makes the move, I'm a thinking thing, or I think, and he makes the move from I think to I'm a thinking thing. This is going to prove to be a controversial move. A lot of his interlocutors, contemporary interlocutors, were like, nope, that doesn't work. It's a controversial claim. He may not have needed to make it in order to get his argument off the ground. Precision is to mean what you intend to mean. Be specific. Okay, so don't equivocate. Don't use words you don't mean to use. Don't say what you don't mean to say. Be specific. Try to be precise as possible. That's what Descartes does when he breaks down the types of ideas, for instance. Focus. Identify and accomplish your tasks. I'm going to prove that God exists and the soul is separate from the body, and that's what Descartes focuses on. Cohesiveness. If you hold multiple views, they need to support each other and not conflict, and it needs to be internally coherent. Mastery of the lit for your purposes, you're just going to have to cite properly. Okay, know when to cite materials and when to cite properly, or how to cite properly, excuse me. Because you can't use resources outside of class in your papers. I mean, you can read them, I'm not going to stop you, but you can't cite them. Clarity. Your readers should know what has and what will happen. Recap and use transitions. This is what Descartes does at the beginning of each meditation. He says what's already happened. You'll see this all the time in writing. You'll see if, then, since, because, therefore, now, that, beginning. On the other hand, first, second, third. These are all words that signal how things hang together. And they're called signposts, right? You should be endeavoring to use them in your writing. Concreteness. Use examples, metaphors, analogies. I give you guys a ton of examples, metaphors, analogies. Descartes has the whole section about wax. These are examples. They're supposed to make abstract, difficult to understand ideas more easily understandable. And they are a sign of good writing. Good examples. Not just any example, but good examples. Flair. All right, use your own voice when you can. Philosophical writing, you can write in the first person. You can say I. You can use contractions. You can write the way you talk, as long as it's coherent and it makes sense. But you can only do that if you're using these other virtues, right? If you can be precise in the way you talk, then you can write the way you talk because it's precise. I kept originality in here because I'm not quite sure what meta means, and I think sometimes it's okay to gesture at something and say, I'm not sure what's going on here, but it was important to the source, and so it's here now. I don't expect you to be too original in your writing at this level, but I do expect you to try to aim for some of these other virtues, and to look for them in writing. So, to reconstruct the text, all right, you need to read the text. We've already talked about how to do that. Open-minded, actively, critically. ID conclusions and premises, right? So these are signposts or transitions. Therefore, because, since, finally, but, for, and, etc. You need to be looking for these things. Outline, paraphrase, summarize. Okay, so I want to point out here that reconstructing arguments, they can be summary, it can be paraphrase, it can be an outline, but it can also be what we're about to do, which is a formal reconstruction. And remember, these are basically just the steps of reading that Wilder gave you and that we talked about. So in your group project, this is what you guys are going to be working on, is argument reconstruction, right? And here's the argument. You were restricted to one page of the meditations. The entire argument is found in the meditations. You're going to be given some words to choose from, and you're basically going to reconstruct this argument. If you have any questions, please let me know. But the goal is to reconstruct the cosmological argument. And the cosmological argument, by the way, is an argument for God. And you should always start, when you're reconstructing an argument, by identifying the conclusion, right? So when you're reading through a text, you try to figure out what they're trying to prove. And then from there, you might be able to identify the conclusion and reconstruct the argument. And remember, this is the cosmological argument for the existence of God. So the conclusion is going to have to do with the existence of God. So this is what you're going to be working on in your groups, along with some other ideas, some other concepts. Again, please ask questions. And I want to emphasize, this is one way to reconstruct an argument. And this sort of formal reconstruction, premise by premise, it takes a lot of practice. So generally, if you need to reconstruct an argument, what you're going to have to do, it's okay to paraphrase. It's okay to summarize. As long as it's clear that you understand what reasons are given in support of a conclusion and you can identify the conclusion, then you can reconstruct an argument.